was a great social conservative. But Reagan was realpolitik, meaning that he wasn't willing to fall on his sword and say, no more spending. Reagan accomplished a lot of things he accomplished with compromises with the Democrat Congress. So you have to consider during Reagan's era, the Democrats controlled Congress for a 40-year span. He couldn't take them on.
Well, he did take them on, but they were very, very strong.
Well, the numbers show otherwise. Numbers show otherwise. He compromised on many, many things. And so I still have respect for the man, but at the same time, if I had dinner with him, I'd take him to task. Say, Mr. President, the reason they gave you a veto power is so you could veto. And that's my gripe with George Bush, because he never once vetoed these things. Okay? So Obama says take responsibility. If you take the $14 trillion debt and you divide it by our population, every single one of you owe $45,000. $45,454 per man, woman, and child. I got a wife, I got 2 kids, that puts me at about $180,000. Frankly, I'd write a check to them today if they promised me a balanced budget. If they implement it today, I'd give them the money today. Okay? I'd give it to them in gold. All right? Now, what's the historical impact? Weimar Germany did this. Inflation began in 1914. World War I. Why is this near and dear to me? Because my grandparents came from Germany between the wars. Why did they come after the First World War? Because they saw the devastation in Europe. They bought a little farm in Missouri where I picked fruit and vegetables in the summer times. But they explained what was going on. And truly, 1919, the value of the mark dropped by 1/3. So if you were giving them $1 and they were giving you a mark, by 1919, you were giving them 70 cents and they were still giving you $1. That's a decrease in their purchase power, increase for us. Okay? By 1922, instead of 70 cents buying one German Reichsmark, essentially 3,180 German marks, which means their mark fell to below the value of 1/31st of a penny. Now, folks, that's a huge change. Why was that? Because they kept printing money. You see, the Allies won the war, and then they insisted that Germany had to pay for it. So what did Germany do? They printed money, night and day, 24/7. They printed money. They get it out of the printing press, put it on the back of a truck, drive to Paris, kick it out of the truck, and say, there you go! Paid in full! Fiat currency, okay? By 1923, you could get 4 trillion marks for $1 US. Is that amazing? Now, picture in your mind's eye, if you had saved your entire life, you're a German citizen, you saved your entire life, well, let's say you've even accumulated 1 million marks. By 1923, that 1 million marks would have equaled 25 cents. I mean, that's the devastation that our government is doing to us today, simply because the amount of money supply is supposed to keep pace with inflation. It can be a little bit larger since we supply currency to the rest of the world. But we've literally doubled our money supply within the last 10 years. In 10 years, we've literally doubled it, okay? Why? Because they're doing deficit spending. Money's got to come from somewhere, so they just print it out of thin air, all right? Argentina did the same thing in 2001. They devalued and defaulted on their pesos. Zimbabwe tried doing the same thing. They ended up with $1 equal 555,000 of their dollars. Results are life savings are wiped out. Now, I've had some of my students say, well, Dr. Baker, that was a long time ago, which is why I have them look up Argentina and Zimbabwe for homework. Well, beyond that, take a look at Greece. This is last year. Last year, Greece had $432 billion in debt. Their debt exceeded 120% of gross domestic product when the International Monetary Fund walked in, and the deficit was continuously running at about almost 13% per year. The International Monetary Fund is 24 people appointed by their government. One is American. Who's that one guy? He's that tax cheat who's in charge of the IRS, okay? So our tax cheat's in charge, and what's the first thing the IMF does? They order the Greek Parliament to decrease spending. They order them to hiring and wage freeze, order them to increase taxes. Their gasoline literally doubled because of the taxation, not because of the price of oil. And welfare cuts. Part of the welfare cuts was cutting state-sponsored health care, rationing. That's how they achieve their cuts. Rationing. Oh, you've got a terminal disease? Thank you very much. Don't let the door hit you in the butt. I mean, and ours is modeled after the European socialist model, the Obamacare. Their savings bonds were downgraded to junk. You know, the whole concept of savings bond, you buy a $50 savings bond, after 10 years it's worth $100, right? Well, in Greece, you buy a $50 savings bond, and after 10 years, it's worth $1. I mean, that's essentially what they mean when they talk about downgrading things to junk. Greece also went from paying 2, 3, or 4% per year on their debt, and now people are afraid to loan them anything. Greece is now paying well over 10% to borrow money to fund their government. All right? Why does that correlate to us? It correlates to us because we're in worse shape. We're literally almost surpassing Greece. 14 trillion by the end of last year, 99% debt to GDP ratio end of last year, deficit consistently over 10%, consistent. Yeah, I mean, just think about it. We had a $1.5 trillion deficit with a $14 trillion economy. How do you do that? Okay? U.S. government measures, Obama's increased spending, Obama increased hiring, and hope is not a plan, folks. Hope is not a plan, all right? Hope's a city in Arkansas, okay? But it's not a plan. I promised to teach you guys some finance. You know, this chart is specifically for Brenda, okay? Give her flashbacks from college. How many people own a house or have owned a house in your lifetime? Okay, so almost the whole room, okay? When you go buy a house, the traditional rate has always been around 6%. It might be higher if you got a bad credit rating, lower if you got a good credit rating. The artificiality we've got today is a new phenomenon, but you know, for the last 40, 50 years, it's been about 6%. If you divide that by 12, you get 0.005. N, how many payments you make. It's usually been 12 months times 30 years equals 360 payments. Present value. Assume you've just bought a foreclosure here, you know, in Mary Esther or something for $140,000. I've seen them. I've looked at them. Okay, get a house for $140,000. If you put that in this equation, which is based on your Excel spreadsheets, you put in the I, put in the N, put in the PV, just like this. You get a little thing. Excel spreadsheet does it for you. Says that you have to pay $839 for the next 30 years in order to pay off a $140,000 house. Everybody make sense? All you got to do is use that equation. You can play with the equation all day based on the cost of the house. You can change the price, you know, the percentage. You can change it to 15 years instead of 30 years. That's the equation, okay? You have to clear at least $30,000 a year in order to pay that. Why? Because your house payment should never be more than a third of what your take-home is, okay? Now, I want you to keep this in your mind's eye, all right? You got the 6%, 360, 140,000, remember that, and 839. Here's our government. If you took those same numbers and you add 8 zeros, this is the federal government. 8 zeros plus 140,000 comes to 14 trillion. Payment. If we have a balanced budget today, the payment is $83.9 billion per month, every month for the next 30 years. Do you remember I talked about intergenerational theft? There it is. Now, if you do 83.9 times 12, it comes to about $1 trillion a year. How much tax receipts do we get? Last year we brought in 2.2 trillion. So right here, you're talking almost 50% of the federal budget has to go towards principal and interest. Everybody understand how serious this is? Okay? All right. You and your kids have become indentured servants. You are de facto slaves of the government, and we were sleeping through it. Now, I tell that to college kids, and they go, I ain't no slave. I say, yeah, you are. When you get that paycheck at the end of the month, and you have those massive deductions, you're a slave. The government sell your butt for a pack of cigarettes, okay? Now, Obama. He made a speech to try to get people to support Obamacare. And can everybody all the way in the back read it? If you can't, I'll read it to you. I don't really want to, but you know, the critical thing to focus on is I break down everything I hear politicians speak into its component parts. Like that, we're going to reduce the deficit by $400 billion? Okay. Over a decade? Okay, divide by 10, right? So let's break this down. 1% here, 1/10 of 1% there. He says we're going to save $4 trillion. Okay? Everybody got that? Here's for my math whizzes. Typically spend $2 trillion in healthcare times this 1/10 of 1% equals $2 billion in savings. He's quoting $4 trillion in savings as a result of Obamacare. It only takes 2,000 years to get there.
I'm out of here.
He's either a freaking genius or I'm just not getting something. Now, I took these numbers into my MBA class and I asked my students, and if any one of you can disprove these numbers, you get an A for the rest of the semester. Yeah? And no, Dr. Baker, you're right. We had one guy, oh, I think you're right. I said, yeah, okay, you're going to flunk anyway. And then you go to the Congressional Budget Office, all right? Congressional Budget Office is basically saying that the Obamacare most certainly requires a significant reduction in federal health care spending. Like Greece, they have to ration. So what we are promised by this federal government is higher health care costs. You will pay, other people will receive, and oh, by the way, you're going to get rationed out of the system. That's their own stuff. It comes straight from Congressional Budget Office. Now, the other big theft, the other big lie, and it torques me off because since I've been a voting individual, I've heard every single president talk about Social Security, bar none. Yeah, you know what they called Clinton? His nickname was, when I was in the Middle East, they called Bill Clinton sex between the bushes, okay? You know, because Bush. So I don't know why that popped in. Bush, Clinton, Bush, and now Obama are all talking about the solvency of Social Security. It's not true. There is no Social Security lockbox. The Social Security lockbox is filled with IOUs. It's $7.7 trillion in arrears, okay? And here's the critical thing. I mean, I've got an uncle who started working in 1964. He retired in 2009. We calculated what he actually contributed to Social Security. This guy's blue-collar worker, high school diploma. I mean, he was not, you know, some banking superstar that was being bailed out by Mr. Obama. But we calculated it, and over a 45-year period of time, my uncle contributed or was extorted out of $212,000. For that $212,000, the federal government has offered to give him between $14,000 and $18,000 per year. Okay, $14,000 to $18,000 is the average per year of Social Security recipients. Some are higher, some are lower. Depends on a little math equation that you do. Depends on when you retire, whether it's 62, 67, 70 years old. Okay. But generally, most recipients get between $14,000 and $18,000 per year. You say, well, gee, you know, that's almost like 10%, you know, and if he lives 12 years, he'll consume the entire $212,000. That's what you consistently hear from politicians. Well, your uncle, if he retired at 62, statistically, he'll be dead by 72, and he'll have consumed the entire $212,000. Well, the reason it's a lie is, again, because I teach MBAs, if he invested it at 8% interest, which is the historical average of the stock market, my uncle would have retired with $1.1 million, and instead of $14,000 to $18,000 per year, he'd have retired with about $90,000 per year. Now, same student that said he figured out where it went wrong. What, Dr. Baker, we don't get 8% per year. Yeah, this one's for you, okay? So we calculated the actual S&P 500, and you can see it goes up, drop down, goes up, drop down, gets flat. If my uncle had been permitted to put the exact same amount of money every single year from 64 to 2009, he would have retired with $1.8 million, not the historical average of $1.1 million. $1.8 million, my uncle would have been able to live off $148,000 a year instead of $14,000 a year.
Yeah, Chile now permits private retirement.
Chile does. Chile's awesome.
Yeah, really great.
Now, the critical thing is, do you want to pull between 14 and 18, or do you want to pull $148,000 a year? That's really the choice. And again goes back to intergenerational theft. They've already screwed my generation. You know, baby boomers and older are basically roasting on the open fire.